Welcome to another episode of Timeless Dialogues. I am your host, Dr. Bill Roach, and I know what many of you are probably thinking to yourselves as you tune into this, another wonderful episode.
We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
Now, I'm here to let you know you are worthy, and today's topic is going to be one of my favorite topics because what we're going to do is we're going to study the discipline of philosophy, but we're going to do it in a little different way. Namely, I want us to approach this by asking one of the more fundamental questions, namely, why should I study philosophy? Now, as many of you know, what I try to do in this entire sort of podcast is I try to equip you to think rationally and to engage on many of these timeless dialogues. And the reason is because I think that it can affect you and your business and your family and your life. And what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get you to see some of these timeless dialogues, namely these big questions that people ask and why they have significance for you. So if you find this to be something that's of value, please like and subscribe because it lets me know what you're looking for and the type of content you like me to produce. Now, as we enter into this topic, what I want to do is I want to look at this in sort of a few different ways. The first one is that I want to look at whether or not philosophy is something that should be a discipline that's required in school. And then I want to go through a Socratic dialogue in which we're going to see why we should actually study philosophy and how that relates to why should I study it in relationship to business or technology or the medical field or any of these fields that help you make money. Now, it's funny because when you hear people talk about a lot of their backgrounds, I have friends that are like, oh, I'm a lawyer. And I think, oh man. And then you hear other people, they're like, oh, I'm a medical doctor. And you think about what you do. And then they look at you and you say, well, I'm a philosopher. And the first thing that typically comes out of their mouth, or at least what they're thinking is,
Man, you are one pathetic loser.
and sometimes there's some truth to that. But what I want you to do is I want you to see is that in order for them to make a value judgment like that, they're going to have to do philosophy. So what I want to do here is I want to pull up one of my favorite little books titled The Summa Philosophica by Peter Kreeft. And I always kind of joke with people, but it's not really a joke. It's that Peter Kreeft is really one of my all-time favorite philosophers. And I want to start this out by reading a segment of this. So please stick with me here because I think it's going to be really important for you. And in this book, he lays out a variety of objections and he responds to them. And here's an objection that he has on whether or not philosophy should be required in schools. Objection 3. Here's what it is. You ready? Are you listening? Are we all paying attention? Do we need to, hear anything that's coming about? Are we good? All right, sit right there. He asks this, or he raises this objection. Most people are more practical than theoretical. What can you do with philosophy? Philosophy bakes no bread. People go to school to learn to make a living and to live in the world, the real world, not in another world of ideas and ideals. Now, I remember hearing an objection similar to this, and you probably are sitting there and you've heard the same thing. What are you going to do with that philosophy degree, kid? You're studying one of the blankety blank disciplines. Or, I always joke with this. What's the difference between a philosopher and a pizza? And they're like, well, I don't know. I don't know what the difference is between a philosopher and a pizza. And I say, well, the biggest difference is that a pizza can at least feed a family of 4. Ha ha, laugh on 3. But there's some truth to this objection. We do live in a world in which the humanities are suffering and suffering greatly. So what I want to do is I kind of want to give a little plea for studying the humanities by asking this question, why should you study philosophy? So Peter Kreeft actually responds to this, and his response to this objection is really good. He says, true, there's not much you can, quote, do with philosophy, but there's much that it can do with you. It is like music in the way, or it's like music in that way, or religion. True philosophy, quote, bakes no bread, but it gives you reasons for the baking of bread. People go to baker's school to learn to bake bread, and moneymaker's school, namely business school, to learn how to make money. But a liberal education should teach you how to live, no matter what kind of a living you make. And this involves philosophy, which asks what living is for. Now, stick with me here. He goes on to say, we make money in order to buy bread, and we eat bread in order to live. But why do we live? If we have no light about that, we are surely living in the, quote, dark ages. And he's really bringing up a good point here is that, a lot of people go to business school because they want to make money, or they're going to go and they're going to do these other disciplines, usually because they can make a lot of money. And some of it is that people need to recognize there's a difference between a means and the end. Is the end just making money? For most people, it's not. It's what they want to do with the money. So now I want to transition here, and I want this to be just a little different type of podcast here. And we're going to read and interact with this. Now, I know for some of you, you might be thinking, oh, I don't really want to do that, or that's quite boring. And I kind of would side with you. It's sort of like,
wow, what a totally amazing, excellent discovery. Not.
And I kind of see their point. But what I want to do here is that I want to go through just a little segment of this book titled The Best Things in Life by Peter Kreeft. And again, I recommend Kreeft because I think he deals with many of these timeless issues. And I'm going to read through some of this and highlight just a couple of points to look at this issue of why you should study philosophy. Namely, we're going to do philosophy and answering the question, why should we study philosophy? So in this book, he's answering all these different questions on the best things in life. And he has this chapter titled On Liberal Education and Careers. And it's a Socratic dialogue. And these are dialogues in which the figure Socrates is methodologically going through trying to look at the questions people are asking and the answers they are giving in order to find the truth of the matter. And in this dialogue, he's interacting with this figure named Peter. And Peter is this typical college student who just wants to make money and have a good time and doesn't see any need to studying philosophy. And what we're going to see here is that his response to it really just adequately changes this figure's life. And I would actually really recommend that you buy this book. So I'm going to start out here, and I want us to look at a little bit of what's going on here. So it says, Socrates, hello, Peter. Peter, you again, I thought I'd escaped you. Socrates, you were mistaken. You can't escape yourself. Peter, you mean you were part of me somehow? Socrates, yes, somehow. How did you do on your exam yesterday? Peter, terrible. I kept getting confused by my memory of you. Socrates, that often happens. Philosophizing can play havoc with philosophy. What are you doing now with all of those papers and catalogs? Peter responds, planning next semester's courses. It's registration time. Socrates, you look perplexed. Peter, I've got to do some serious thinking before I choose my major. Socrates replies, perhaps I can help. Thinking's my thing, you might say. Peter, perhaps you can. You see, I'm at a turning point in my education and maybe in my life. I can't decide between business and science as my major, but how could you help me to make that choice? It's not your choice. Socrates replies, no, but I might help you apply the world's most practical tool for making choices. Peter, sounds good. What's that? Socrates replies, well, that's logic. Now think about what he's saying here. We see this very opportune dialogue that he's trying to have here. The guy's trying to figure out his major. Should I go into business school? Should he go, as he says here, business school and a science major? And he really is perplexed on what to do. And notice how Socrates starts to engage this. He tries to look at this in a very logical way. And we know how many people look at the issue of logic today. They tend to think to themselves,
well, Lottie frickin' duh!
And it's because we live in one of the most irrational ages that man has ever lived in. Oh, I mean, humanity has ever lived in. Yeah, we all laugh at that. Now let's keep going here. He goes on to say this. Why would it be this issue of logic? And Peter says, already it's sounding worse. How is logic practical? How would it help me choose? Socrates replies, it would tell us first to examine the nature of choice in general, then apply the principles of choosing to your particular choice. Shall we look? Peter says, I guess I need all the help I can get, so I'll endure your silly questions again. And even though they left me with all the questions and no answers last time. Maybe this time we'll make some progress. Socrates goes, oh, but we made enormous progress last time. Lesson 1 is usually harder than lesson 2. Peter, what do you mean? Socrates says, I think you know. Peter says, you mean lesson 1 is questions and lesson 2 is answers? Socrates says, yes. See what a quick learner you are, a quick starter at least. It took me a lifetime to fully realize lesson 1. Peter says, so let's get started on lesson 2. Peter is looking back at Socrates, and Socrates says, perhaps you are not such a quick learner after all. Do you really think you have already learned in one day what took me a lifetime? Peter says, well, no, I don't have all your answers yet. Socrates says, you don't have my questions yet. Here's something that's interesting about the issue of philosophy. And I know that we're trying to dialogue and we're trying to look at a few things here, but I want you to see that it's not just the answers that are important. Sometimes it's the questions that are important too. A lot of people don't realize that one of the most difficult things that you have to face when you give any type of presentation is not just the answer. It's actually asking the right question. And so many people don't notice and recognize the fact that one of the hardest parts, whether it's writing a term paper or giving a presentation or proving your point, is asking the right question. And I remember one time I was sitting in a philosophy class and this figure was talking about his doctoral advisor. And this student would raise a question and the advisor would say something like, that's not really the right question to be asking. And I know he kind of got offended and thought to himself, well, it's the question that I'm raising and it's something that I'm raising about the topic. But the reality is that philosophy is going to teach you the difference between a superficial question and something that's an actual real question about the topic. So think about what he's looking at here. Socrates is trying to look at this reality that it took him a lifetime to ask the right questions. And this college student thinks, I can get that overnight and just move on. He's a pragmatist in every sense of the term. Now let's continue looking here because it gets to be really important here. Notice what he says. Socrates goes, a reasonable thing for one in search of answers, don't you think? They are the road, and only those who use the road find their way home. Well then, let us ask about choosing. Would you agree that whenever we have to choose between two things, whether really or apparently good, both must seem attractive? Peter says yes. So we should look at different things or at different ways things are attractive. But aren't there thousands? I think, Socrates goes on to say, they can be reduced to two. A thing may be or seem good for something else, like a tool, or a good for itself, a means or an end. Do you agree? Now, I want you to think about what he's saying here. I want us to break this down. As he's looking at this, he says that there are two categories. A thing may be or seem good for something else, like a tool, or it may be good in and of itself. And it's the difference between a means and an end. And an end is the final purpose for which you are doing something. And a means, given his analogy, is the tool by which you accomplish that goal. So you hear a lot of people who will say things like, well, I want to make a lot of money. And what they really mean by that is that they want to have a lot of fun with what money can do. The goal is fun. The end, the thing in and of itself that they're searching for is fun or happiness or whatever that may be. The means of achieving it is money. So keep that key distinction in mind here as we continue looking at this. Let's press on. So he goes on to say this. Peter actually says, no, what's good for itself? Socrates says, what about happiness? Do we choose happiness as a means to anything else, riches or pleasure or reputation? Don't we choose all those things as a means to happiness? Peter says, I guess we do, but how does that help me choose between business and science? Notice what he's doing here. Socrates is pressing this figure, Peter, and he's pressing him in a deep way. And he's trying to look at this, how we get happiness. Maybe it's riches, pleasure, or reputation. And when we have these things in good report, it gives us happiness. But look at what Peter says. How does this help me choose between my major? He's such a pragmatist that he doesn't even see how these kinds of questions affect his day-to-day life and his ability to actually choose on relevant topics. Now let's continue here. He says, how impatient you are, Peter. Do you seek these two things as a means or an end? Means, I guess. Socrates says, then we must consider two questions: what ends they serve and how well they serve those ends. If one of them helps you to a better end, or better helps you to the same end, it would be the better thing to choose, wouldn't it? Peter, oh yes, indeed. How obvious. Why didn't I think of that? Socrates says, perhaps because you were too busy looking at science and business that you neglected philosophy. Now think about this. There's a lot of people today who fall for this exact trap. They get so caught up in all the material things that they're dealing with. Oh, I want to go to business school. I want to do this. I got to build this. I got to do that. That they skip these fundamental questions. It's not that they're not answering them. It's just they're answering them in a terrible, almost pathetic fashion. Now, continue to press on here. Peter says, philosophy, that's not my thing. That liberal art stuff is for the snobs. Snobs? Questions Socrates. Peter says, sure, rich people with leisure. I've got no time for that. I have to plan to get a good job when I graduate. What good can philosophy help me do? Philosophy says, or Socrates says, define good. Peter, you mean philosophy can help me define good? Socrates replies, exactly. And unless you know what good is, you can't tell me what a good job is, can you? And if you can't tell me what a good job is, how do you expect to find one? Peter says, I know what a good job is. It's one that makes a lot of money. Now think about that. Think about what he's doing here. He's asking him to define that which is good, because you can't have a good job or a good life or a good wife or a good car or whatever good things you want unless you know what the good is. And notice how Peter says, well, it's just a good job. It's one that just makes me a lot of money. Isn't this today's world? Isn't this the world in which we live, where people are so constantly obsessed with what they can get with money and what money may be able to buy them, that they don't even realize that they've missed the whole point? So as he goes on here, Socrates says, okay, one that would enable you to become rich and leisured. Peter says, right. Would you then be a snob? No, says Peter. Socrates goes on to say, then you were wrong to define a snob as someone with riches and leisure. Peter says, look here, are you out to help me or to insult me? Socrates, are you sure those two things are either or? Socrates, Peter replies, I can't take any more of this cleverness. I'm a practical person, and I'm concerned with practical things like making money. Now, if you really want to help me, just accept me as I am, and let's talk about careers. Socrates says, all right, let's talk about practical things. Take money, for instance. Now, this may be you. You may be a person who's asking, why should I study philosophy? And you're like, I just want to be a very practical person. I don't like to theorize about things. I don't like to think about ideas and esoteric things like this. But notice what he's doing here. Socrates is saying, okay, let's talk about practical things. And what he's going to do is he's actually going to show that philosophy is actually more practical than a job, money, food, or any of those other types of things. Remember, it may not necessarily always put bread on the table, but it's going to tell you why it's important to actually put bread on the table. So let's continue here. Peter says, gladly. Now you're talking, because he's wanting to talk about practical things. Socrates said, if you couldn't buy anything with it, if all your money were counterfeit or out of date, then it would be good for nothing, wouldn't it? Of course. So money is good only as a means, not as an ends. Peter goes on to say, it's good for whatever money can buy, and that's a pretty big piece of the pie. So you're interested in these courses in science or business as a means to a good job, and the job as a means to making money, and the money as a means to buying a piece of the pie, right? Peter says, right on target. Socrates. So you see what question logic leads to next. The pie? Now you're on target too. Yes, says Socrates. Now, things you hope to buy with your money, is any one of them an end in itself? A car, for instance, or a house? Peter says, I don't know. I never thought of that. So think about what Socrates in this figure is pressing him with. So you want to make a lot of money to get a piece of the pie. And the next logical question that he looks at is, okay, you want to buy things with money, right? So are the things that you're buying an end in and of themselves, or only just a means unto something else? So you go out and you get a car, you get a house. What's the purpose of having a car or having a house? And notice how Peter, he really doesn't even know the answer to the question. He even says, I just never really thought about that. So notice how Socrates looks at this. He goes on to say, that is precisely why I'm here to remedy. Isn't a car called a means of transportation? Peter says, yes. Socrates goes on to say, and isn't a house a means to shelter you and your family and your possessions? Peter says, yes. Socrates says, then we must ask, transportation for what end? Shelter for what end? Oh, I don't know, says Peter. It's too complicated. One thing I do know, though, liberal arts are going to help me get what I want. Socrates says, how do you know that if you don't know what you want? And might not liberal arts help you to know what you want? Peter says, I don't know. Notice what he's looking at here. I want what I want, but he's pointing out this idea that how do you know what you actually want? Is money going to tell you what you want? Is your house going to tell you what you want? Is your career going to tell you what you want? Because just a minute ago, all of those things were the things that you wanted. So we need this discipline that's going to tell us how do we know what we want, when we want it, and how to get what we want. And Socrates is going to say, well, this is what philosophy is going to bring us. Notice this. Socrates says, good. You are learning lesson 1. Shall we proceed to lesson 2 and try to find out what you want? Please, says Peter. Socrates, well, then to begin with, do you think it is in any way the same as what everyone else wants? Do you think there is any common or universal end sought by everyone? Or do you think each one seeks a totally different end? Peter says, well, different strokes for different folks, they say. Socrates says, do you see nothing common to all these different strokes? No, says Peter. Do you? Socrates said, well, don't we all seek happiness and pleasure and joy? Peter, oh, of course, but that's abstract. Nothing concrete is universal. Socrates says, well, what about food and drink and health and preservation of life? Oh, of course, says Peter. Our bodies all need the same things, but that's all. Socrates says, what about love and friendship and companionship and escape from loneliness? Peter says, all right, so we share some common ends. So what? How does that help me choose between business and science? Now think about what he's just done here. He's trying to give this dialogue, these series of questions, as he's trying to look at this idea of, is there anything that's universal for humanity? Is there something that all of us seek and all of us need, or are we just kind of doing our own thing? And this is important because a lot of people live by this, you do you. You do whatever you want to do. There's nothing that we collectively all have in common. And if we collectively did have something all in common, we would all collectively be seeking some common good. And he just doesn't even see the reality that, practically speaking, it's not just our physical things that we need help with, but we all commonly seek for things such as happiness and other factors along those lines. Now, he starts to ask the question, so what benefit is this going to provide me in my job major? So let's look at his question here. He then looks at this and Socrates says, are you concerned mainly?
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Sorry, Siri. Please shut yourself off. Sorry, my friends. Siri must have heard something weird. You know what we have to say to things like Siri when she does that?
Have you gone mental?
Because we know what Siri does on a regular basis.
Have you gone mental?
So the next time we must use this famous phrase whenever little Miss Siri pops up on my computer. It's Chinese.
Subtitle, zip it.
All right, back to what we were doing before. Sorry for that little prelude. So how is this going to actually help me with a job? And he goes on to say this. He says, yes, I look for number 1. Anything wrong with that? Socrates says, I did not say there was, but from the sharp tone of your answer, I suspect you think there is. Perhaps we could investigate that question some other day. But for now, I think I can show you that a liberal education can bring you great benefit, perhaps even more than science or business. No way, says Peter. Socrates goes, you know that for certain, do you? So he's starting to question, though. You have a certain question there. You think that you know this thing with certainty, and the reality is that he doesn't. But Peter thinks that he does. He says, yep, I know it for certain. Now, Socrates says, perhaps lesson 1 has not been learned after all. Shall we look at this thing that you know for certain, just to be sure we do not miss something? Peter says, I've looked already. Forget about it. Socrates says, but even when we look, do we not sometimes overlook? Isn't it worth taking a few more minutes to look one more time just to be sure you didn't miss something that might be of great benefit to you? Peter says, oh, all right. What do you want to look at? And Socrates says, at the benefits science and business can bring you, and then at the benefits of the liberal arts, and then at the comparison between them. He goes on to say, Peter says, we already looked at business. It would teach me to make a mint. Socrates says, and that road led to a dead end, remember? Unless you have an answer now to the question about means and ends, a live end, so to speak. No, let's look at science. All right, what attracts you there? Same thing, money, says Peter. Science is where the big bucks are, the dough. The bucks mate with the dough and make more bucks than dough. A deer park. Peter says, it's deer, all right. It's higher education. Now, here's one of my favorite parts. Look at this. He goes on to say, I see you're catching my appendicitis as well as my good infection of philosophizing. Well, then, it seems pretty straightforward. If your only end is money and you won't consider any further end, then whatever means is more likely to attain this monetary end is what you want. It is a mere calculation of probabilities. Are you sure that's all you care about? Well, says Peter, I kind of like to do something worthwhile. I'm worth millions, helping humanity and all that. I don't see why I can't do well and do good at the same time. Do you? Socrates says, no, indeed. But the factor complicates your calculation a bit. It means you must ask a second question about science and business, which helps humanity more. Peter says, that's why I'm hesitating. Business will make me rich faster, I think, but science seems to be better in the other way, a sort of higher calling. I thought of medicine or psychology or social work too, but they don't turn me on like the sciences. Socrates says, and what is the value to humanity you see in science? Is it the search for truth? Peter says, come on now. What century are you from? Socrates says, you would not believe me if I told you. But what does the century have to do with the truth? Do you tell the truth with a calendar? Look at that. So notice what he's struggling with here. He's wanting to do the sciences because he thinks that it's going to help people. And he sees the value in it. But why should you actually help people? Is it to bring the truth to them? Is it to just make them feel better? And what does it mean to make somebody feel better? What does it mean to help somebody out in life? But here's one of the key questions that I want us to look at. He says, is it the search for truth? Come on now. What century are you from? Socrates says, you would not believe me if I told you, but what does a century have to do with the truth? Do you tell the truth with the calendar? Think about what philosophy is going to teach us right there. What century are you from? Is truth timeless or is it time bound? Is there a truth for yesterday or is there a truth for yesterday, today, tomorrow, and all ages? Now, if you say that there's only a truth for yesterday, or that truth is something that can only be relegated to another past era, well, does that truth claim that you just made apply to all truth eras? Is that one truth claim not time bound while all other truth claims are fundamentally time bound? You see the issue there? You see how just a little thinking about a topic might bring more light to a situation, not just the topic at hand, but to topics in general, to virtually every topic. Why? Because truth touches every topic. And to deny that would be a truth claim. Hence, it's touching another topic. So look at this. Peter says, Socrates, in the 20th century, the point of science is not some abstract truth, but power, control of the forces of nature. Our time doesn't think about truth anymore. Socrates says, I wonder how time can think. I thought only people did that. Peter said, the people of our century then, all of them? says Socrates. Almost. Socrates says, well, what about the scientists? Do they think science is for power rather than truth? Peter responds, well, I don't know. Some do and some don't. I don't care about that. I think so. That would be my motive for going into science. And we're supposed to be helping me decide, aren't we? Notice this. When he's pressed, what does he do? He totally diverts the question. He can't even answer the question of, do scientists perform their tasks for power or for truth? Notice how he resorts. It's what I think it is. It's just a personal, relative concept. He's the arbitrator of all reality in this sense. Now let's continue looking here. He says, yes, we're trying to help you decide. Peter goes, well, that's what I'd go into. Practical science, not theoretical science. I'd go into technology. All right, says Socrates. So far, we have mentioned 3 areas of study for you: business, practical science or technology, and liberal arts. Do you see what each one can give you? Sure, says Peter. Business gives me money, technology gives me power, and the liberal arts give me pain. Socrates says, let's look at power for a minute. I wonder whether it will be a dead end too, like money. Power is a means, isn't it? Yes, says Peter. Then what is the end to which the power of technology are means? Peter says, making the world a better place to live in, cars and rockets and bridges and artificial organs and Pac-Man. Socrates says, so technology improves material things in the world. Peter says, yes, including our own bodies. Pretty important, don't you think? Socrates says, oh, yes, but I wonder whether there might be something even more important to us. If we could improve our own lives, our own actions, our own behavior, wouldn't this concern us even more intimately than improving the world outside of us? Why, says Peter? Socrates says, because its benefits would be closer to home, so to speak. Now think of what he's trying to say here. People want to go into practical disciplines because they think that it's going to practically help people. And there's nothing wrong with that. We see that there is good use for helping people. But notice he says, well, we want to go into practical sciences because it's going to help their bodies, that which is most close to them. And Socrates would agree. He would agree that there's something valuable to helping that which is most close to you. But what's even closer to us sometimes than our physical bodies? Socrates says it's our actions, our lives, our thoughts, the way that we live in this, quote, internal world. And Peter agrees that we should probably help this because it's going to help those who are closer to home. Now, let's continue to reflect upon this. You see what's going on here is that Peter fundamentally wants to help that which is most close to him, but he hasn't thought about that which was most close to him. So you're asking yourself, why should I study philosophy? Because it's going to help you answer questions like this, or at least think about questions like this. You want to study a discipline. You want to go into a field that's going to, quote, help you the most. Well, that's philosophy. It's the most close to you. You're dealing with the categories of truth, that which is internal versus that which is external. It's better to help your soul than it is to help your body. But in a materialistic age, that seems foolishness. But maybe we should reject the premises of a materialistic age. Let's continue on. Peter says, I see, yes. I guess that's why I'm attracted to business. Making my life a little better is more practical to me than making, a bridge or rockets. So business is better than technology, right? Socrates says, well, not necessarily better in the absolute and unqualified way, especially if we use good and better without defining them. But from your point of view, business seems to improve something closer to you than technology does, an aspect of your life. Politics and ethics would do the same in a much more fundamental way. Now, notice what Peter says. He says, politics and ethics, no way. I want something practical. Socrates says, oh, politics and ethics are quite practical. They teach us how to practice, how to act. Aristotle called them the practical sciences, and technology the productive science. Practical sciences improve our practice. Productive scientists improve our products. Economics is a practical science. Peter says, then I guess it's economics and business for me. Notice what's going on here. He's not even aware of the disciplines that are the most practical. And he even points out that through this line of reasoning, that economics and business are for him because it's going to improve his life the most, like a practical discipline. Socrates says, for that reason, that improves something closer to yourself? Peter says, yes, I look out for number one. Socrates then goes on to say, then you should choose liberal arts for the same reason. What, says Peter? I heard what you said Peter. I just couldn't believe it. It's silly. Socrates says, silly may be in the eye of the beholder. Look here. If you could find some study that improves something even closer to yourself than the practical sciences, you should prefer that, shouldn't you? Peter said, yes, but you said liberal arts. That's way out in left field. Socrates goes on to say, let's see, what is the purpose of the liberal arts? Peter goes on to say, who knows? You know, I hope. If not, let's remedy that, said Socrates. Peter says, I guess they're for culture, a veneer of upper class respectability for snobs, not slobs. Peter said, you are so wrong that for once I will simply tell you the right answer. The liberal arts seek knowledge for its own sake. Notice this. He has this misunderstanding of what the liberal arts are for. They're for the snobs, not slobs. And he's very clear and he says, no, what is the purpose of the liberal arts? What is the purpose of these? Knowledge for its own sake. And Peter just can't grasp this. He says, that's far out. That's out of my ballpark. That's knowledge for its own sake stuff. May be a turn on your philosophers, but not for me. Are you quite sure? Questioned Socrates. Look at your own standard again. How did you rank the sciences? Peter said, by how close to home they came. And liberal arts is by the left field foul pole. It's way out there. Socrates said, let's see. Productive sciences improve what? Things in the world, said Peter. And the practical sciences improve what? My practice, said Peter. Socrates said, and knowledge for the sake of knowledge improves what? Peter says, nothing. Notice what Socrates says here. Don't you see that it improves something closer to you than your practice? No, what? What is the closest thing to yourself? My underwear, I guess, said Peter. Socrates, yourself, is it not? You're you, your identity, your personality, your psyche, your soul, your consciousness, your mind. Do you have any idea what I'm referring to? You look puzzled. Peter said, I think you're talking about something more than my good looks, but I have trouble seeing that far inside. I guess you mean the liberal arts are supposed to give me some sort of expansion of consciousness, right? And Socrates, well, you could call it that, yes. I call it a liberation from the cave of ignorance, almost like birth, or waking up, popping your mind out of its womb-like dreams into the light of reality. Peter said, my liberal arts courses never gave me that. Stop right there. Notice what he's saying. Socrates is looking at this idea that the liberal arts are going to expand your horizons, bring you out of the cave of this ignorant world. And Peter says, my liberal arts classes never did that. That may be the issue that you're facing. You've taken really bad philosophy classes and you say all philosophy classes are really bad. Or, I went and took one exercise course and that course was bad, so all exercise is bad. Or I took one girl out on a date and she was a terrible, crazy, ridiculous woman. And you thought, well, I don't want to do that again. So you threw out all issues of dating. The reality is that you don't do that. You don't do that in any other area, but we do it in philosophy. And why is that? It's because we live in a world that tells you that philosophy is unimportant, impractical, do it once, throw it out, you never need it. So look here. Look at how Socrates answers this. This is probably one of the most important sections of this entire chapter. Socrates says, and the fault was either with the teacher or with the student, but not with the subject. But what could I do with liberal arts, says Peter. The question is rather, what can they do with you? Peter says, no, I want business or science. Forget it. Socrates says, you can take both. Peter says, I'm forced to. The college has those silly required courses. Socrates says, for a good reason, as we have just seen. And here's a second one. Whatever career you choose, science or business or anything else, you also have a second career as well. And liberal arts will help you with that. Peter says, yeah, you mean to like moonlight? No, says Socrates. I mean, you can't just be a businessman or a scientist or a technician. You must also be something else. Do you see what? No, said Peter. Peter says, all the more need then. A human being is what? That is our common career, and the liberal arts help you to that end. You see the point? Philosophy is going to train you for life's second job. Namely, what does it mean to be a human being? Not just going to give you pie in the sky answers. It's going to give you fundamental answers about how you should live your life. So why should you study philosophy? It's going to prep you for this second career, this fundamental aspect of what does it mean to be a human being in this world versus just how can I make money? How can I be happy? How can I do this? It's what does it mean to live the good, true human life for the ultimate ends and purposes? Another way we might ask this, what is the chief end of man? And I will give you an even broader answer, one that Socrates cannot give us. Chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. It's to find salvation in Jesus Christ. How do we glorify and enjoy God? It's by faith and repentance through the mediatorial work of his son, Jesus Christ. Let's continue on here. He goes on to say this. How? How can this help me to that end? Asked Peter. Socrates says, they investigate the question I devoted my whole life to. Know thyself. Was it not your concern with yourself that you were using as your standard in choosing what courses were most important? Well, but yes, but, says Socrates. Know thyself, says Peter. It's fine for philosophers, but we slobs need diversions. Socrates says, don't we also need truth? Peter said, Pac-Man's more fun, you know. Socrates, it isn't, you know. I've tried both. Have you? Peter says, you question everything, don't you? Socrates says, yes, especially the most important thing. Long ago, I said the unexamined life is not worth living. You seem to be saying now that the unexamined life is not worth living. Is that what you think? I don't know what I think, said Peter. Well, says Socrates, that's lesson 1 anyway. I guess I haven't gotten that far into lesson 2 yet, says Peter. He goes on to say, somehow I know I'm not finished with you, Socrates. Socrates says, or with yourself, I hope. Peter says, let me go get a cup of coffee to clear my head of all these cobwebs. Socrates says, he said, you mean these logical thoughts? And he says, I'll be back in a little bit. I'm not going far. So if you're still with us here, which I hope you are, I hope you see what the point of this is. It's to know thyself. You study philosophy, not just to sit around with a couple of weird people with, little scraggly hairs hanging off their chin, but to know what the meaning of life is. You look at philosophy and you study philosophy to know that which is true, that which is good, that which is beautiful, what it means to be a true human being, what it means to find God as your true end in finding your true humanity, what it means to live the good life. In all of these other disciplines, can't really give you that. Business is not going to teach you that. The medical field is not going to teach you that. None of those other disciplines are going to teach you that. But what will? Philosophy. So why should you study philosophy? Because it's going to help you know thyself.